welcome. I'm Pastor Bill Van Nostrand, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Astoria. I've just been here since 2016, but I was so impressed when I came to town and found how carefully the membership had taken care of this reverent and ancient worship space. Each and every Sunday, we try to welcome neighbors or wake them up by pulling the cord and announcing that we will be meeting together at 10 a.m. One of the most fascinating things for me to discover was that originally, about 1902 or 1903, when Captain Flavel commissioned some boat builders to construct this wonderful sanctuary, it was built in the round. And that means that the table of worship was set up on the dais in the middle, and then people sat in front, on the sides, and in back. It was only later when the burgeoning congregation decided that a pipe organ would be worth having, that wall was closed off, and classrooms and kitchen and storage and restrooms spaces were created. Things that I love to share with visitors to Astoria who come specifically to see our church is that this beautiful ceiling was constructed by craftsmen from an age gone by. For example, there are no nails up there. All of the pieces are fitted together with wood dowels. Secondly, there are a couple of things going on in this architecture. Certainly, as you will find in many cathedrals, there is a cross. There's a long center section, and then the side alcoves are the arms of a cross. The second thing is that the wooden structure is built like an inverted boat. And thus, we call this space where the people ride or worship the nave. And that word refers to the same root that comes into our understanding as navy. So this is an inverted boat in the shape of a cross, and the people worship in the nave.
Okay, so our church was first founded in 1877, and it was initially started by the folks out in Clatsop Plains. As you're driving down, towards Seaside, Camp Rylea, there's a little church there. That's the original congregation. And our first church is down where the U.S. Bank parking lot is. And interestingly enough, it was a mail-order church. Something that was a part of the Presbyterian plan book, and they built it there. And I bring that up because when this church was constructed in 1903, we still don't know who the architect was and whether it was a Presbyterian plan book or if it was designed by somebody who was never recognized in any of the newspapers. We do know some of the carpenters that were involved. Eric Gustafson was one of the main contractors involved. And also when we were doing the restoration of the church a few years back and removed the siding, 3 of the carpenters had written their names in pencil on the sheathing inside the wall. So we saw those names as well. So this church was constructed in 1903, and the land on which it was built was owned by the Flavel family, and Captain Flavel willed the property to the church. And then he also willed $4,000 with the idea that this church would be constructed. However, there was the catch, and the catch was the church had to be had to cost at least $10,000. He wasn't going to have his money used on a cheap church. So he said it has to be at least $10,000. And they worked for quite some time to raise the money. And eventually it got kicked over the top, and they made $19,000. In fact, they raised several $1,000s in the opening ceremony of the church to get that paid. So it's just a little over $19,000. And the church itself, as Bill has mentioned, has this beautiful truss work in it. And that's local Oregon fir for the truss work. And it's called a hammer truss. And you would see hammer truss in England in Gothic churches or Tudor churches, etc. And all the truss work that you see, this is real truss work. It's not fake. There's just simply the truss work and the woodwork that you could see there, and then the roof, nothing more. So all of that is pretty unusual. The shapes, the style is really kind of unusual and quite beautiful. And as Bill has said, it looks like an inverted boat. So we have mostly Oregon fir in here. There is some redwood around some of the windows, but the rest is Oregon fir. The church itself, I've seen two different figures. One is it seats 350, the other it seats 450. And one of the ways that we increase the size of the seating capacity is through the wainscoting. And the wainscoting actually doubles as a bench. So legs drop down, and now you have extra seating for people within the church. The organ itself, it was first played on New Year's Eve in 1910. They had a special program here to play the music. They also had a magic lantern show that night as well, and so brought people in to hear the organ. It's an SD organ and has nearly 700 pipes in it. The organ chamber is behind the pipes there.
So the pipe organ is such a wonderful feature of this structure. And I'm so proud of the congregation for maintaining the organ so that we can use it each and every Sunday. One of the fascinating tidbits about pipe organs is this is the root, this is where the phrase pulling out all the stops comes from, because pipe organs typically have stops, a violin stop, a horn stop, a melody stop.
Okay, so here's a list of some of the original members, and we see that the Flavel women, were founding members of our church. And Nellie, who you see here, she was the pianist and organist for the church for many, many years. By the time this structure was constructed, she really wasn't doing that as often, but she was a pianist from a very early age for our church. The Povey brothers their father was trained in England in stained glass. He was a craftsman, and he brought that craftsmanship to the United States, and eventually they worked their way to Portland, and they were the most prolific stained glass company on the West Coast. And so it's referred to as cathedral glass, and that's really just kind of the way that it's made through being pressed and all. But we have two types of glass, at least, in this. One, we have the crackle glass, as opposed to the muffled glass here. Both are German types of glass. And one of the things that you can identify in the stained glass as being Povey, they love the use of jewels. They were quite fond of dogwood and roses and lilies and all that sort of thing. And sometimes you can find their signature on the glass. I have not found it on any of our windows at this point. But the Povey brothers were really quite special, and they apparently put colors together that people couldn't even conceive of having put together before.
One time John Goodenberger and I attended a presentation by the National Trust for Historic Preservation out in Portland, and we had a speaker from an organization called Sacred Places, which was an organization that helped historic churches find ways to make their buildings viable. And I remember specifically, and I've never forgotten, that the presenter told us the first thing is that we should know and understand is that churches are more interested in saving souls than they are in saving their buildings. One of the things that I've always maintained here in our church is that we need to do both. We don't have the luxury of doing one or the other. Maybe in terms of priorities, maybe, and probably the saving of the souls is the first priority, but way on top is, and right there, close by, is the maintenance and the restoration of a building like this. And as you can imagine, this building takes an extraordinary amount of attention and maintenance. When you see these wonderful sacred places and they're being kept up and in fine shape, just know that there are people in that building and in that church who care about the building and the structure and hope that it will be here for many, many, many more years.